My name is Sabrina Davis, and I'm 28 years old. When I was 13, my parents drove me 3 hours to Cincinnati for my sister's dance competition, then left me alone at the train station because Chelsea thought it would be funny. My mother's text came 20 minutes later. "We left for your sister's show. Find your own way home." No one turned the car around. I didn't go home that night, and I never went back. A transit officer named Ruth found me on a bench at midnight, and that bench became the first honest thing in my life. 15 years later, I built something my hometown couldn't picture. What my family never counted on was that I kept every message they sent, and that one day, they'd be standing at a door they couldn't walk through. I want to say I remember every detail of that drive. The truth is, I mostly remember the garment bag. It hung from the hook above the back seat, a shimmering thing in a clear plastic sleeve, and it took up so much room that I had to tilt my head against the window just to see the highway going by. Chelsea's costume, sequins the color of a swimming pool. It cost more than everything in my closet put together, and my mother said so out loud, the way you'd mention the weather. "Careful with the garment bag, Sabrina. That costume cost more than your whole closet." I was 13. I said sorry. I was always saying sorry back then, for taking up space, for existing at the wrong volume. We drove 3.5 hours from our town in Ohio down to Cincinnati. Chelsea was 15 and vibrating with nerves in the front seat, and my father kept taking one hand off the wheel to squeeze her shoulder at every red light. My mother ran lines of encouragement the whole way like a coach before a title fight. Nobody asked me a single question the entire drive. Not one. I counted. Somewhere around Dayton. And then I stopped counting, because it started to feel like keeping score against myself. I'd brought a book. I read the same page maybe 4 times, because it's hard to read when you're listening that hard to a conversation you're not part of. That was the thing about being the second daughter in my family. You learned to listen from the outside of things. You learned where you fit by noticing all the places you didn't. Chelsea's competition was a big one, regionals, and there'd been a whole week of build-up at home, new shoes, a hotel booked, my mother on the phone every night with the other dance moms. I'd asked once if I could bring a friend along to keep me company at the venue. My mother had looked at me like I'd asked for something outrageous and said we couldn't afford the extra hotel bed. There was always an answer like that ready to go. Never mean, exactly. Just final. I remember thinking we'd go straight to the theater, but we didn't. We pulled into the train station instead. Cincinnati Union Terminal, this enormous half-dome of a building that looked like the future somebody imagined back in the 1930s. I remember thinking we were early. I remember thinking maybe we were meeting someone there. Inside, the terminal echoed. Our footsteps came back to us off the marble floor. Chelsea got bored fast, the way she always got bored when she wasn't the center of a room, and she looked over at me and got this little spark in her eye that I really should have learned to be afraid of by then. "Let's leave Sabrina here," she said. "Just for a minute. It'd be funny." I waited for someone to tell her no. My father laughed. My mother told me to wait right there, just for a second. They were going to run out to the car and grab something. Chelsea was already giggling, and I stood there under that huge ceiling, holding nothing, wearing my own regular clothes, and I watched my family walk out through the front doors. Then the car pulled away from the curb, and it didn't slow down, and it didn't come back. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I remember the exact weight of the relief I felt, how sure I was it would say we're kidding. "Come out front. Hurry up. We left for your sister's show. Find your own way home." I read it maybe 10 times. The words never rearranged themselves into anything kinder. I called my mother. It rang and went to voicemail. I called my father. Same thing. I texted back. "Where are you? I don't have any money. I don't know how to get home," and the little bubbles never came. Nobody was typing. Nobody was coming. For the first hour, I genuinely believed they were coming back. I stood near the front door so they'd see me the second they pulled up. I rehearsed how I'd act. I decided I wouldn't be mad. I'd laugh along so it would stay a joke. So nobody would have to feel bad. So it wouldn't become a thing. That's how much I still wanted to make it easy for them. Even then. Even standing alone in a train station in a city that wasn't mine. The second hour, I stopped standing by the doors. I had $11 in my pocket and a phone at 40%. I didn't know the bus routes. I didn't know anyone in Cincinnati. I thought about calling the police. And then I thought about what I'd even say. My parents left me here, and how that would sound, and how much trouble it might cause, and some deep-trained instinct in me flinched away from causing trouble for them. So I didn't call anyone. I just waited. The station emptied out around me as the evening wore on. The big departure board clacked through its last few trains. The little coffee kiosk pulled its metal shutter down with a bang that echoed. A janitor ran a wide dust mop across the marble in long, slow passes and didn't look at me twice. A voice came over the speakers announcing a final train to somewhere I'd never been. I sat down on a wooden bench because my legs had stopped feeling like mine, and I stayed there while the light outside the tall windows went from gold to gray to nothing at all. Then, close to midnight, a woman in a uniform sat down next to me. Her name was Ruth Kowalski. She was a transit officer, maybe 50, with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair and a voice that didn't perform anything. She didn't ask me what was wrong in that bright, loud way adults sometimes do. She just sat. And after a while, she asked if I was waiting for someone, and I told her the truth, because I was too tired to invent a better version of it. She got me a hot chocolate from one of the machines. I remember the steam coming off it in that cold, air-conditioned hall, and how she wrapped both my hands around the cup like the warmth was the whole point, and the chocolate was just extra. "I'm not going anywhere until someone comes for you," she said. "And if no one comes, I still stay." She took out a small notebook and started writing things down. The time. My name. My parents' number. I didn't understand then that she was building the first honest record of my life. All I knew was that somebody was finally writing me down instead of leaving me out. Ruth got my parents on the phone eventually. I could only hear her side of it. And then, when she stepped a few feet away and lowered her voice, I could hear the part she didn't want me to hear anyway, because the terminal was empty by then, and sound travels a long way in an empty place. "She's your daughter," Ruth said. "I need a parent to come get her or authorize a pause. I understand it's a long drive. It's still your daughter." Another pause. And then Ruth went quiet in a way that wasn't calm at all, and she looked back at me over the top of her glasses, and something in her face changed and didn't change back. My parents told her they couldn't come. They told her I was tough, that I'd be fine, that they couldn't just drop everything for this. A few words came across clear before she turned further away. "Can't come get her." Ruth stopped writing in the middle of a sentence. She made another call after that. A different number. Child Protective Services. Because when a 13-year-old is left alone in a train station at night, and the parents on the phone decline to come retrieve her, that is what happens next. That is the only thing that can happen next. When she came back and sat down again, she didn't tell me what they'd said. She was gentle about it. She said we were going to get me somewhere safe and warm for the night, and that she'd stay with me until they came. She asked if I was hungry. She found me a granola bar from somewhere in her jacket and watched me eat it like it mattered to her that I did. At one point, I asked her very quietly if my parents were mad at me. I don't know why that was the question. It's the question a kid asks. She looked at me for a long moment, and I watched her decide not to lie and not to tell me the truth either. "No, honey," she said. "I don't think you did anything wrong tonight. I want you to hold on to that." I didn't understand any of it. I was a kid whose family had played a joke that went too far, and I kept waiting for the punchline, the part where they came rushing back in, embarrassed and sorry. But even then, some small animal part of me noticed something. Nobody on that phone had sounded surprised. Not once. A real joke would have had a little panic in it somewhere. This one didn't have any at all. I spent that night, and a lot of nights after it, in the emergency placement they found me. Then a first foster home. Kind enough. Temporary by design. I kept a bag packed by the door for almost a year. There was nothing important in it. A change of clothes, a toothbrush, the charger for the phone they never texted again. Every night before bed, I'd pick it up, check it, set it back down. I kept telling myself they just needed a little time. I kept telling myself that somewhere, a few hours away, the guilt was building up in them like water behind a wall. And one day it would break, and the car would come back up the street, and I'd be ready to go in under a minute. I made up excuses for them the way you'd make up excuses for someone you loved. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they were embarrassed. Maybe they'd tried to reach me and the message hadn't gone through. Maybe there was a version of that night where they were suffering too, somewhere, missing me. I built entire imaginary conversations where they explained themselves, and I forgave them. I was 13. Forgiveness is easy to give when you're that hungry to be wanted back. The bag wore a shiny spot into the strap from all that lifting and setting down. Then, one afternoon, the phone actually rang. My whole chest jumped. But the name on the screen wasn't my mother's, and it wasn't my father's. It was a caseworker. She was calling to tell me about a new placement, a woman named Gail Brennan, who fostered the kids the county didn't know what else to do with. Gail's house was small and warm and smelled like coffee at every hour of the day. She'd raised her own kids and buried a husband and decided she had more house than grief, so she filled the extra rooms with teenagers the system had gotten tired of. The first night I hovered in the kitchen doorway, waiting to be told the rules, waiting to find out what I had to do to earn a spot at that table. Gail just pulled out a chair. "In this house, nobody has to earn dinner, honey," she said. "You just come sit down." She kept that chair for me. Mine. Even when I came home late from the 2 part-time jobs I picked up in high school, the chair would be sitting there empty and waiting instead of filled by somebody else. It's a small thing to describe. It rebuilt something in me that I didn't have the words for yet. Gail never asked me to call her mom. She never asked me to be grateful, or to perform being healed, or to be anything other than a tired kid who'd been through something. She just fed me and kept the porch light on and signed my permission slips and asked how the algebra test went. The first time I got sick under her roof, a bad flu, she sat on the edge of my bed at 2 a.m. with a cool washcloth and a ginger ale, and I cried. And she didn't ask why, because she'd fostered enough kids to know that sometimes the crying isn't about the fever. It's about finally being somewhere safe enough to do it. When I was 16, without telling Gail, I mailed a birthday card to my parents' house. I didn't write anything angry in it. I didn't ask them why. I just signed my name, and I put my return address on the back, so they'd know where I was if they ever wanted to know. I checked Gail's mailbox every day after school for a month. Then for another month, less sure of myself. There was never anything. No card back, no letter, no phone call, nothing at all. That was when I finally understood that silence is also an answer. It's just the one nobody wants to say out loud. I aged out of the system at 18 in 2015 with 2 part-time jobs, a high school diploma, and one small, stubborn idea. The idea started because I was broke. Skincare was expensive, and my skin was a wreck from stress and cheap products, so I started making my own in Gail's kitchen. Simple stuff. A balm, a face oil, ingredients I could actually pronounce, mostly because I couldn't afford the ones I couldn't. Friends started asking for jars, then friends of friends. Someone offered to pay me for one, and I remember standing there with a jar in my hand, peeling the last piece of masking tape off the lid where I'd written the ingredients out by hand. I peeled that label off, and I thought, nobody ever built me a soft place to land. So I'll just have to learn to make one myself. I liked that the products were about care. That was the part that hooked me. I'd spent my whole life on the wrong end of care, watching it get pointed at other people, learning to want less of it so I'd hurt less when it didn't come. And here was this thing I could make with my own hands that was nothing but care, that existed for no reason except to be gentle with somebody's skin at the end of a hard day. I think, honestly, I was making it for the version of me that used to check a mailbox for a card that never came. I just didn't know that yet. 3 years later, that jar had a name: Lark and Stone. If you've ever been the strong one your family assumed could handle being left behind, stay with me here. This story is really about you too. Follow along so you don't lose it. I started Lark and Stone in 2018 with $3,000 I'd saved up in a coffee can and a checking account. For the first year, I made everything by hand in a rented commercial kitchen I could only afford to use at night. Which was fine, because I was working a day job anyway. I'd pour and label and box up orders until 2 in the morning, packing tape screaming across my knuckles, then sleep 4 hours and get up and do it all again. I didn't have a safety net, so I became one, for myself first, and then for every single person I eventually hired. It grew slowly, and then, all at once, the way these things do. A local boutique took us, then a bigger one. Then people started ordering from states I'd never even been to. By 2025, Lark and Stone did a little over $6 million in revenue and employed 34 people, most of them women who'd needed someone to take a chance on them, the way somebody should have taken a chance on me once. I want to be careful here, because I know how this sounds. The $1 million company. The comeback. It reads like the good part of the story, the part where the music swells. But I didn't build it to win anything, and it didn't fix the thing that was broken in me. For a long time, I worked the way people drink. 14-hour days, weekends, holidays alone in the warehouse, because being alone in the warehouse felt better than being alone anywhere that wasn't productive. The company was proof. Proof that I was worth keeping. Proof that they'd been wrong about me. I was still, in some quiet way, building a case to present to people who were never going to read it. That took me years to see. Somewhere in the middle of all of that, a woman named Nora Vance walked into my life. Nora came on as my first real hire, back when real hire meant I could barely make payroll for one person. She was smart in a way that made me nervous, and loyal in a way that made me even more nervous, because I'd learned by then that the people who got closest were the ones best positioned to leave. I kept waiting for her to leave. She noticed. "You keep waiting for people to leave," she told me once. We were doing inventory in the cold storage room at 10 at night, splitting a sandwich because neither of us had stopped to eat all day. "I'm just going to keep not leaving until you believe me." It took years. She kept her word the entire time. Then one afternoon, an email came in from a regional magazine. They wanted to write a feature about the company. About me. I said yes to the company part easily. I could talk about Lark and Stone all day. The sourcing, the growth, the women I'd hired. The rest of it I kept in a drawer. But the reporter was good at her job. She'd done the digging. She already knew about the foster care, and gently, in the interview, she asked me about the beginning. The real beginning. The one that started in a train station. I remember my fingers stopping over the reply field the night she sent me her follow-up questions, the screen the only light in the whole room. I answered honestly. I didn't know yet how far a true story can travel, once you finally let it out of the drawer. The article came out that fall. It was good. Better than good. It told the truth plainly, and the truth, told plainly, has its own kind of gravity. There was one line near the top of it that I read more times than I want to admit. She was 13 when her family left her at a station. She never went home. The photo they ran was of me standing in front of our flagship store, one hand resting on the door frame like I was checking to make sure the building was real. In that picture, I looked like someone who belonged somewhere. It had taken me 15 years to look like that. The piece spread through the region fast, and back in my hometown, 3.5 hours away, people started doing the math. Because here's a thing I didn't know until much later. My parents had spent 15 years telling everyone I had run away. That was the story. Poor Wayne and Denise, their difficult younger daughter, took off as a teenager, broke their hearts, never looked back. The story let them keep their friends, their church pew, their standing at the diner counter. It made them the sympathetic ones. The article didn't call them liars. It didn't have to. It just laid the real timeline down next to their story, and anyone could see the shape of the gap between the two. I heard about the fallout secondhand, from the one cousin who'd stayed in touch. People in town were putting it together. The neighbors who'd brought casseroles to my heartbroken parents. The women from church who'd prayed over my mother's grief. The men at the diner who'd clapped my father on the back and told him kids these days had no loyalty. All of them were now holding a magazine article that said a family drove a 13-year-old 3 hours from home and left her at a station, and that she'd grown up in foster care, and that she'd built something remarkable in spite of it. That's a hard thing to unknow about your neighbors. Nobody likes finding out they helped carry someone's lie. Someone left a comment on the online version that a cousin of mine screenshotted and sent me. Wait, this is the girl they said ran away? Chelsea, by then, was 30 and quietly ruined. The dance studio she'd opened had gone under, owing something like $220,000, a number that was public record if you knew where to look. The golden child's shine had worn all the way through to nothing. And then my phone buzzed with a text from a number I hadn't heard from in 15 years. It was Chelsea. Hey, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. Can we talk? I read it sitting in my car in the store's parking lot, engine still running, rain just starting to tap the windshield. 15 years of nothing, and now 3 sentences that somehow sounded almost soft. I typed no. I looked at it. I deleted it. And then I typed something else. Because there was a part of me, a 13-year-old part I'd thought I'd outgrown a long time ago, that still wanted to know what she'd say. We texted back and forth for a week. She was careful. She said she'd been thinking about me a lot. She said she was sorry. She never quite said for what, but she circled it, and the circling was enough to get me to agree to coffee. I told myself I was going for closure. The truth is, I was going for the sister I never got. That's the part that's hard to admit. Because on paper, Chelsea was the one who said it would be funny. Chelsea was the one who laughed. If anyone had earned my anger cleanly, it was her. But she'd also been 15, a kid herself, raised by the same people who'd taught her that I was the practical one, the disposable one, the joke. And some stubborn, lonely corner of me had spent 15 years imagining a day when she'd sit across from me and say she was sorry, and mean it, and we'd get to be sisters after all. I'm not proud of how much I wanted that. But I'm not ashamed of it anymore either. Wanting your family to love you isn't a character flaw. It's just the last thing to die. I picked a coffee shop on neutral ground, halfway between our 2 lives, and I got there early and sat with my back to the door on purpose, so I wouldn't spend the whole time watching for her. She was 40 minutes late, and when she finally showed up, she didn't come inside right away. I could see her through the front window. She was standing just outside the door, phone pressed to her ear, and she was laughing. Not nervous laughing. Easy laughing. Relaxed. The laugh of someone handling something routine. My breath fogged a little patch of the glass, and through that patch, I watched my sister finish her call. I couldn't hear all of it, but I caught the shape of the ending, the way you catch the last few words when someone's wrapping up. Okay, I'm going in. This shouldn't take long. Just get the card ready. Then she put her phone away. And her whole face changed. The ease drained right out of it and something practiced took its place. And by the time she pushed through the door, her eyes were wet. She sat down across from me with those red eyes and opened with the exact words I'd once lain awake wishing someone in my family would say. I've thought about that day every single day of my life, she said. And maybe some part of that was even true. But I'd seen her through the glass. I'd heard, "Get the card ready." So I sat very still, and I let her talk, and I watched the apology slowly bend into something else. It took about 10 minutes. The sorry became context, and the context became a situation, and the situation became a request. The studio. The debt. How hard things had gotten. How family helps family. "We're still your family," she said, reaching across the table but not quite touching my hand. "Family helps family. You of all people should get that now." She'd brought a letter, too, from our mother. Folded into quarters, the creases pressed so flat that it had clearly been written and rewritten more than once. An invitation, it said, to come home, to let the past be the past, to be a family again. I took the letter. I didn't read it there. I put it in my bag and told Chelsea I'd think about it, and I drove home with it sitting on the passenger seat like a small animal I wasn't sure was actually dead. That night, I went to the drawer where I kept the one text I'd never deleted, the 7 words, because I wanted to read them next to my mother's invitation. And when I reached into that drawer for my phone, my fingers touched something else. An old contact card I'd saved years earlier and forgotten about. A number for a retired transit officer named Ruth. I'd stayed loosely in touch with Ruth over the years. A card here, a phone call there. She'd retired from the transit authority a while back. When I called her that night and told her my family had reached out to me, there was a long pause on the line. "Sabrina," she said finally, "there's something I've held on to for a long time. I always hoped I'd never have to give it to you." She still had her notebook from that night. The real one. The official one. Copied and kept. Because something about the whole thing had never sat right with her. She read me a few lines over the phone, and then she mailed me the pages. The ink was 15 years old, but the words were perfectly clear. Times, names, and one line in Ruth's careful hand that I read until it stopped looking like language. Parents declined to retrieve. Not parents couldn't be reached. Not parents were delayed. Declined. That one word rearranged the entire night. A joke gone too far is an accident. Declining to come, get your own child, is a decision. I read that page probably 50 times over the next few days. I'd put it down and go do something ordinary, make coffee, answer an email, and then I'd walk right back to the table and read it again, like I was checking to see if it still said what it said. It always did. And every time, a little more of the story I'd told myself for 15 years quietly came apart. Because I'd built my whole understanding of that night around the idea that it was chaos, a prank, a miscommunication, a thing that got out of hand and then got too big for anyone to fix. Chaos I could almost forgive. Chaos happens to people. But declined isn't chaos. Declined is a choice somebody makes with a clear head, on a phone, while their child sits on a bench 100 miles away. And then Ruth said the thing that changed everything. "There's one more thing I never told you about that night. When I first called them, before any of the paperwork, your mother said something. She said, and I wrote it down, that maybe this was for the best. That you'd always been the independent one." She paused. "A frightened parent doesn't say for the best, honey. I've made that call 100 times in my career. They panic. Every single time they panic. Your mother didn't panic. I didn't sleep that night. I started pulling on threads, calling the few relatives who'd ever been kind to me. One of them was my Aunt Carol, my father's sister, who'd always looked at me a beat too long at holidays, like she was sorry about something she could never quite bring herself to say. Carol didn't pick up. But a day later she left me a voicemail, and I've kept it the same way I kept the text. Her voice was shaking. "Sabrina, honey, I heard you'd been in touch with your mom. Before you decide anything, there's something you deserve to know." A breath. "They asked me to take you. Months before that station. Wayne and Denise sat right in my kitchen and asked if I'd raise you because you were, the word they used was practical. They said you'd be fine anywhere. I said no. And God forgive me, I've regretted it every day since. That station wasn't the start of anything, Sabrina. It was just the day they finally stopped waiting for a better excuse. I sat with that one for a long time. And then all the little things I'd carried my whole life started clicking into a single, terrible line. The $8,000 a year for Chelsea's costumes and lessons and competitions. The "we can't afford it" every single time I needed anything at all. The friend I couldn't bring to regionals because of a hotel bed. The birthday cards that got smaller for me and bigger for her. The way I'd been praised, when I was praised at all, for being low maintenance, for being easy, for never needing much, as if needing less made me easier to love, when really it just made me easier to leave. It had never been about money. There had always been money. It had just never once been meant for me. That was the reframe that actually broke my heart. Not the station. The station was one night. What Carol's voicemail told me was that the station wasn't the wound. It was just the scar. The wound had been there the whole time, running underneath my entire childhood, and I'd spent 30 years calling it bad luck. And I finally understood why my hometown had been so shocked by that article. They hadn't just believed I ran away. My parents had made sure of it. I laid 3 things out on my kitchen table, under the lamp. The text. We left for your sister's show. Find your own way home. Ruth's page. Parents declined to retrieve. And a screenshot my cousin had dug up. An old post from my mother's account, from that same summer, telling the whole town how heartbroken they were that their daughter had run away, asking everyone for their prayers. I touched each one in order, left to right, following the timeline like a finger tracing an old scar. Ask Carol to take her. Leave her at the station. Tell the world she ran. It wasn't a joke that went too far. It was a plan, with a joke stapled to the front of it. I didn't cry. I'd done my crying 15 years earlier, on a bench, in the dark. Instead, I opened my laptop, and I pulled up the guest list for the gala. Let me back up and tell you about the gala, because by then, it mattered a great deal who I'd become. For 2 years, Larkin Stone had quietly funded scholarships for foster kids aging out of the system. The ones who hit 18 with a trash bag of clothes and nowhere at all to go, the way I once had. 15 kids a year, $12,000 each, for school, or rent, or just a running start on a life. I never put my name on it. The fund was called the Union Terminal Scholarship, after the station. A private joke with myself, turning the worst place in my whole life into a door for someone else to walk through. I didn't want my name on it. I wanted those kids to feel chosen, the way I finally was. When you grow up being the one who's useful, you learn to be suspicious of every kind thing that comes with a name attached, because a name means someone's keeping track, and keeping track means there's a bill coming. So I made sure there was no bill, no name to thank, no debt to repay, no strings to find later. Just a door, quietly held open, by nobody. I wanted them to have the one thing I never did, which was help that didn't cost them anything, help that didn't need them to earn it or perform gratitude for it or be easy in exchange for it. That fall, we were throwing our first real fundraiser for it, the Second Home Gala. 300 guests, $500 a seat, a goal of raising $1 million in a single night to grow the fund. 3 days before the event, my assistant mentioned something offhand. A last-minute ticket purchase had just come through. The name on it was Davis. I didn't panic. I'd stopped panicking about my family the night the 3 sheets of paper taught me exactly who they were. Instead, I went and found Nathan Boyd, the head of security for the event, and I told him exactly what to do if certain people showed up asking for me. If they come, I told him, you don't stop them at the gate. You let them get close enough to hear this. I handed him a note, folded once. He read it, looked at me for a second, then folded it back up and tucked it into the breast pocket of his jacket. I'm not going to tell you yet what the note said, but I'd waited 15 years to write it. The night before the gala, I practiced my remarks in the empty event hall. I'd written a speech about the people who show up, about Ruth, about Gail, about the kids the fund had already helped. I read it out loud to rows and rows of empty chairs. I didn't mention my parents once, not one word. I decided the night wasn't going to be about who left. It was going to be about who stayed. And I was only going to name the ones who stayed. I had my outfit hung up and ready for the morning, and tucked into the corner of the mirror frame beside it was a card Ruth had sent me the day we opened our first store. "Proud of you," it said in that same careful hand. Knew it on the bench. Before I walk you into that gala, tell me something in the comments. Have you ever had someone come back into your life only when you finally had something they wanted? I'd like to know I'm not the only one who's lived that. Then it was the night of the gala, and a car with out-of-county plates pulled up outside the hall. The room looked beautiful. Warm light on round tables, 300 people in their best clothes, that low, happy hum of conversation people make when they're genuinely glad to be somewhere. A few reporters near the front. We'd invited them for the fund. And along one wall sat a whole table of teenagers, our scholarship kids, looking slightly stunned to be in a room like this one. I welcomed everyone. I said something I actually meant. Every person in this room showed up for someone tonight. We're here to show up for the kids nobody did. The room warmed to it. I remember looking out at all those faces and feeling something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time, which was safe. These were people who had come, on a weeknight, in nice clothes, to give money to children they would never meet. Nora was at a table near the front, watching me with that look she gets. The scholarship kids were whispering to each other by the wall. For one clean minute standing up there in the warm light, I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by people who'd chosen to be near me for no reason other than that they wanted to be. And it was right about then, at the far end of the hall, that 3 people stopped in the doorway. Nobody had shown them in. They'd just appeared, the way weather appears. My mother, my father, my sister. They came down the side of the room, and my mother had her chin up in that way she got when she'd already decided how a thing was going to go. She'd dressed up. They all had. And watching them come, I understood that they thought they were walking into a reunion. My mother reached the edge of the light near the stage and spread her hands like she was arriving at her own party. "Sabrina, sweetheart," she said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "We're your family. Don't do this in front of everyone." My father hung back half a step, uncomfortable, and my mother reached over without even looking and adjusted his collar. That old gesture. The exact one from every forced family photo of my childhood, straightening him up for a picture nobody was taking. Chelsea's eyes found me across the room and did something complicated. And near the front, a couple of the reporters lifted their cameras and turned toward the commotion. Which was, I realized, exactly what my mother wanted. A scene. A photo. The prodigal family, reaching out for their lost girl, in front of witnesses. I didn't move toward them. I'd spent the first 13 years of my life moving toward those people and getting nothing back for it. Instead, Nathan stepped forward. Calm. Unhurried. In his dark jacket. He didn't raise his voice at all. He took the folded note out of his breast pocket, opened it, glanced at it once, and then he looked at my mother and delivered the line I'd written. "Ms. Davis asked me to tell you," he said, "that she already found her own way home." He paused. "You're welcome to find yours." Then he folded the note back up and put it away. For a second, my mother's face didn't understand it. And then it did. Those were her words. Her exact words. From a text message 15 years old, handed right back to her in a room full of people. I watched them land on her. I watched her realize that I had kept them all this time, that I had been waiting, and that the waiting was finally over now, and she was standing on the wrong side of it. I had wondered, honestly, whether saying it back would feel like anything. I'd imagined this moment more times than I want to count, and what surprised me was how quiet it was inside me when it finally came. There was no rush of triumph. There was just a door closing, softly, in a room I'd been standing in the doorway of my entire life. She had told me to find my own way home. I had. And now she got to hear what that had cost her, in 7 words, in front of everyone whose good opinion she'd spent 15 years protecting with a lie. Her mouth opened to argue. But before she could get a word out, another voice came from the stage. It was Hannah Wells. Hannah was 19, our very first scholarship recipient, and she'd asked me weeks earlier if she could say a few words at the gala. I'd said yes, of course. She had no idea any of this was happening. She just walked up to the microphone at her scheduled time, because to her, this was simply the program. 2 years ago, I aged out with nothing, Hannah said, her voice shaking a little into the quiet. And somebody I've never met paid for me to have a life. I don't know who started the Union Terminal Fund, but whoever you are, you looked at a kid nobody wanted and you decided she was worth something. The room went very still, and into that stillness, my sister, who had come for a check, who had a card ready, said the thing that showed everyone exactly who she was, not in a whisper, loud enough for the tables all around us. "This is ridiculous," Chelsea said, gesturing at the room, at Hannah, at me. "She has millions and she can't help her own blood?" The nearest tables turned toward her. A woman 2 seats away quietly slid her chair back, away from Chelsea. That small physical language of a person deciding they don't want to be associated with something. Somebody's fork went down onto a plate. And up on the stage, Hannah looked out at the 3 strangers standing at the edge of the light, then down at me, and something in her face understood all of it. I stood up. I walked to the microphone. And I said one thing. I didn't tell the room the story. I didn't read them Ruth's notebook, or play them Carol's voicemail, or hold up 15 years of receipts. None of that belonged to these people at their nice tables. It belonged to me. I looked at my mother and I kept my voice completely level, and I said, "You didn't lose a daughter 15 years ago. You left one. I just stopped waiting to be found." Then I turned away from them. I turned toward Ruth, who was sitting near the front in the good dress I'd bought her for the occasion, and I put my hand on her shoulder, and I told the room we were going to keep going. The lights on the stage didn't reach the doorway where my family stood. They were just outside the warm part of the room now. 3 people in nice clothes that nobody was looking at anymore. And it was my father who turned first. Wayne, who'd squeezed Chelsea's shoulder at every red light and never once looked back at me in a rearview mirror, turned around and walked toward the exit. And nobody, not my mother, not my sister, reached out to stop him. They left. All 3 of them. Out into the parking lot and the out-of-county car and the 3.5 hours back to the town where the story didn't work anymore. I'd love to tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. Choosing yourself doesn't feel like winning at first. It feels like burying something. I went home that night and sat in my quiet apartment and grieved. Not the people who'd left. The family I'd spent 30 years hoping they might somehow turn into. Because here's what nobody tells you about a moment like that. You don't just lose them. You lose the fantasy of them. And the fantasy is the part you were actually attached to. I wasn't grieving my real mother, the one who wrote, "Find your own way home," and meant it. I was grieving the imaginary one I'd built on a foster home mattress at 13, the one who was going to come back and explain everything and hold me and be sorry. I'd kept that imaginary mother alive for 15 years. She'd cost me more than the real one ever had. And that night, I finally let her go. And letting go of someone who never existed turns out to hurt just as much as losing someone who did. For years, without ever meaning to, I'd kept a kind of empty chair in my life. A space held open for the day they'd finally be kind. That night, I finally understood there was no one coming to sit in it. Same as the bag by the door. Same as the birthday card. The chair had always been empty. I'd just been the only one who kept setting a place at it. A few days later, Chelsea texted me one more time. I watched the typing dots appear and disappear a few times before the message actually came through. Like she was drafting and deleting, the way I once had. In a parking lot. In the rain. "I really am sorry," it said. "But if you ever change your mind about helping, you know where we are." And there it was. The sorry. And then, the but. The apology with a hook buried in it. Even now. Even after everything. The reaching was still really about what I could give them. Some part of me believed the sorry was real. I think it probably was. But I'd finally learned that remorse and change are two completely different things, and that a person can be genuinely sad about what they did to you and still be sitting there waiting for you to fund their next chapter. I could have done a lot of things with that. I had the receipts. I could have posted the whole timeline, named the lie, and let the internet do to them what they'd spent 15 years doing to my reputation in a small town. I had the screenshot of my mother's runaway post. I had Ruth's page. It would have taken about 10 minutes and it would have followed them for the rest of their lives. I didn't. Not because they deserved mercy. I'm not sure they did. I didn't do it because I finally understood that punishing them would have kept me tied to them, and I didn't want to be tied to them anymore. Revenge is just another way of waiting by the door. It keeps the person at the center of your life. And I'd spent long enough building my whole self around what they did to me. I wanted, for once, to build it around something else. I won't punish them, I decided. I just won't audition for a family that already cast me out. I opened Chelsea's contact and I changed the name. Not something cruel, just honest. I saved her number under people from before. My thumb hovered over it for a second, and then I pressed save, and the old name was gone. Then I opened my calendar, and I booked a trip I'd been afraid to take for a very long time. The week after the gala, I had dinner with Ruth and Gail. The two of them had never actually met before that year, and watching them talk, Ruth with her careful hands, Gail refilling everyone's water without being asked, I felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled my entire life. I spent years grieving the family I was born into, I told them. I forgot to thank the one that chose me. Gail reached over and put her hand on top of mine, the same way she had that night with the flu, and she said, "Honey, we didn't choose you because you were easy or because you were useful. We chose you because you were you. That's the only reason anybody should ever get chosen." I had to put my fork down for a second. Nobody in my family of origin had ever, in 30 years, said anything close to that to me. It had taken a retired transit officer and a foster mother who wasn't obligated to love me at all. Gail still keeps a chair for me at her table. Ruth brought her old notebook to that dinner, and she set it down on the table between us, and then she said she didn't need to hold on to it for me anymore. She'd carried it for 15 years. She was ready to just put it away in a drawer and let it finally be over. That same week, Hannah Wells texted me. Not about the gala. Not about the past. About her first semester of nursing school, and a question about her class schedule. Like I was just someone in her life who'd want to know about it. And I was. The trip I'd booked wasn't far. It was Cincinnati. Union Terminal. I hadn't set foot back in that station since I was 13 years old. I walked in under the same enormous domed ceiling, and the sound of my own footsteps came back to me off the marble exactly the way it had that night. And for just a second, I was a kid again, with nothing at all in my hands. I found the bench. I'm almost certain it was the same one. Same worn wood. Same view of the big departure board clacking through its cities. Same echo of a voice announcing a train. I sat down and I let myself feel all of it. The 13-year-old who'd waited here with $11 and a phone at 40%, so sure the car was coming back. I didn't try to rush her along or tell her to be strong. I just sat with her for a while, the way Ruth had sat with me, the way Gail had sat on the edge of my bed. I think that's the thing I'd needed the whole time and never gotten. Not an apology. Not revenge. Just someone to sit down next to the worst night of my life and not leave until I was ready. The last time I sat there, someone left me. This time, I'd come on my own. And I could tell, sitting there, that I got to leave on my own too. That was the whole difference. Not the money, not the company, not the gala. Just that the leaving for once was mine. I sat for a while, and then I stood up, because I wanted to, and I walked out into the daylight. Here's what I know now. 15 years and one gala and 3 sheets of paper later, my family didn't get to decide my worth by leaving. They tried. They asked my aunt to take me. They left me on a bench. They told a whole town I ran. And none of it worked. Because worth isn't something other people hand you and then take back whenever they feel like it. I decided mine by staying for myself. If there's one boundary you're still afraid to set with your own family, say it in the comments. Sometimes saying it to strangers is the first step to actually meaning it. And if this story reached something in you, stay a while. You're allowed to choose yourself too. That night, I locked up the flagship store myself, the way I still sometimes like to. I turned off the lights inside, and through the glass, the sign glowed soft over the empty street. Lark and stone. 2 words I made up in a borrowed kitchen when I had $3,000 and nobody waiting up for me. I stood on the sidewalk for a second and looked at it. Then I went home. Nobody had to tell me I belonged there. I already knew.